I'm Emanuel. I teach Adobe units here, and I'll be teaching you for the next 4 weeks. So I like to start off all of my software courses with just a quick introduction to what the software can do and how we can use it. So Illustrator is a image making program in the same way that Photoshop is a kind of image making program, but they're both very different because while Photoshop is raster based, which means that all the images that we make in Photoshop are made up of pixels, which are tiny little dots that make up the images that we see on our screen. Illustrator is vector based, which means that all the images are made up of mathematical equations. We don't need to know any maths, but basically what that means is that behind the scenes in Illustrator, all those shapes and images that we see drawn up are being calculated with equations, which means that the sort of main thing is that it means that any drawings that we do in Illustrator can be scaled infinitely in terms of their size. So you can draw something the size of a postcard or even smaller in Illustrator, but you'll have no problem blowing that up to the size of a billboard. Just to demonstrate this explicitly, if I've got Photoshop open, and I draw a black circle in Photoshop, it looks like a circle. For all intents and purposes, it basically is a circle, but as I zoom in, you'll see that it starts to get pixelated and a little bit blurry. And if I zoom in enough, you can see the arrangement of pixels in a grid. So this is raster based, meaning it's made up of pixels. On the flip side, if I were to draw a circle, a black circle in Illustrator, it looks like a circle, and as I continue to zoom in, it stays as a circle. So it stays with that really nice crisp edge, as opposed to the one in Photoshop, which gets all pixely and blurry and a bit horrible. So this is the main attraction to vector graphics. As a quick introduction or sort of little presentation. So we're going to go through the basics of how it works today and a little bit about the interface, and then we'll just get through how we draw some simple shapes. So in the Illustrator window, we're going to click on New File or Create New or Make New or whatever it says. It says something slightly different depending on what version you're running. And this opens up the new document interface, which looks just like the one for Photoshop, where we've got some tabs along the top, mobile, web, print. And as we click through to different tabs, we get different blank document presets that appear underneath. So if we're designing something and we know it's only going to exist on mobile, you'll see that we have templates for iPads or iPhones or Google Pixels, etc. For web, we've got standard web sizes. I guess more kind of intuitive. We have print, where we have things like A4, A3, etc. As I click on any of these presets, the values on the right-hand side change. And I don't have to stick to any of these presets. I can put in my own values if I want to. For example, if I knew that I was going to work on a piece of square paper, I could put in 210 notes by 210, but we'll keep that at A4. I can change the units of measurements on the right-hand side as well. And if I click on this drop-down menu, you'll see that we have a couple of extra units of measurement that we don't have in other Adobe programs, namely feet and inches and yards and meters. So Illustrator is showing you can make stuff that's several meters long if you want to. But because things can scale anyways, you don't necessarily have to work the exact scale that you intend something to be. If you were going to make something and you wanted it to be 50 meters long, functionally, there's nothing really that different to making it 50 centimeters. So we'll leave that alone. We change the orientation of our document, portrait or landscape. Our screen's a landscape, so let's work with landscape for now. Then there's a number of artboards. Artboards are essentially like pages in a document. So if you want to do something that's going to be multi-page, you can put more than one artboard. Or if you're going to be iterating upon something, so we want to do various different versions of it, you can have several different artboards where you try one version that's pink, another version that's yellow or whatever. But you can add and remove artboards later on, so that's not a hard commitment. We've got bleed, Bleed is supplementary space that exists outside of your document. So if you're going to make an A4 poster, and something on that poster is going to bleed off the edge, or it's going to have a full color background, that A4 poster wouldn't get printed on A4 paper. It would get printed on a slightly larger sheet. And if you have a bleed of 3 mm, that means that your design will be A4 size plus an extra 3 mm on all edges, which means that when it comes to trimming it down, there's a sort of safety margin of if it gets trimmed a few millimeters incorrectly. I've had to explain this many times, and I never do a good job of it. We'll add 3 mm of bleed, and I'll just show you what it looks like. We've got color mode, RGB and CMYK. CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or key color. So if we use CMYK color, then our document's colors are going to simulate printing inks, because printers use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. It means that the colors that we'll have will be slightly more limited than if we were to use RGB, which stands for red, green, and blue. Our screen emits red, green, and blue light, and different amounts of red, green, and blue light create the entire color spectrum that we have on our screens. So with RGB, you'll be able to get things like hot pinks, neon reds, etc., really, really bright colors, which otherwise wouldn't be reproducible with normal printer inks. So you'll get a better impression of how something will look if you choose CMYK color, but things will look brighter and more vivid if you choose RGB. But color on computers is a big can of worms, so don't worry too much about this. We'll just stick with CMYK for now. Raster effects is confusing because it's called resolution in Photoshop, but essentially it's a way of identifying how big this virtual piece of A4 paper is. I'm just going to call it resolution because that's what it's called in other programs. But at high resolution, 300 pixels per inch means that for every inch on our screen, there are 300 pixels packed in. And that means that this virtual piece of A4 paper is equal to a real piece of A4 paper. Anything smaller than that, and it won't necessarily print out that, which isn't really relevant for Illustrator because things can scale infinitely anyway. So I wouldn't worry about this unless you're starting to bring in raster images into Illustrator, which you might want to do. And I'll go through it in a few weeks. But anyways, we're just going to make an A4 document. It's going to be landscape. Let's give it 3 mm of bleed, and then let's hit create. Here is our document, or our artboard, our single artboard. It's the big white thing in the middle. On the left, we've got our toolbar. On the right, we've got some palettes or panels, which will affect the way that we can use certain tools. You'll notice that as I select certain tools, that panel on the right-hand side changes. And on the top, we've got a control bar, which also affects how certain things change and behave. Just so that we're all working with the same interface, we're going to change it a little bit. Let's go to Window at the top. Then let's go to Workspace, and then let's choose Reset Essentials Classic. It's in Window, and then Workspace, and then Reset Essentials Classic. We're also going to make sure that we have the full toolbar available to us. So for some reason, Illustrator is the only program that by default won't show you all of the tools that you have available. So if we go to Window and then Toolbars, and then make sure that you've got the advanced toolbar and not the basic one, because the basic one will hide certain tools from you. So just make sure that's set to advanced. And also just make sure that you've got control checked as well, which just means that you get that control bar at the top, which is very useful. We do want the control bar. So let's just go through some tools really quickly so start drawing. The first tool on the toolbar is the selection tool. It allows you to select things. As I click and drag on my document, you'll see that I make a selection window because I have nothing on the document. There's nothing to select. So we're going to draw some stuff and then we'll come back to this. If we go a few tools down, we have the shape tools. If I click on hold on whatever shape it is, you'll see that I have a hidden menu with other tools in it. Let's just choose the rectangle tool for now. And with the rectangle tool, if I click and drag on my document, I'll make a rectangle. Unlike, say, for example, in Photoshop, where having drawn that rectangle once, that's a done deal. If I want to change it, I have to get rid of it and draw it again. In Illustrator, everything is a ready to edit object. Once I've drawn that rectangle, I can click and drag its corners to scale it. I can also move it around if I drag it from the middle. So as I drag it from the middle, you'll see that I can move the rectangle around. So very simple to draw rectangles. If I hold down Shift while drawing a rectangle, I'll be locked into a square instead.
Sorry, how do you move it again?
I drag it from the middle. When I've got the selection tool, I don't actually have to go back to the center to drag, which is quite useful. I can click anywhere. Oops. If I hold down Shift while moving something with the selection tool, then I'll move it in 45-degree angles, which is useful if I want to move something straight to the side or straight up or down. If I hover the mouse just outside the corners of a shape, I'll get that sort of bendy arrow, which means that I can rotate it. And if I hold down Shift while rotating it, I'll be locked into rotating it at 45-degree angles, which is very useful if I want to turn something directly onto its side.
You want to draw again?
If you want to draw another rectangle, then we have to go back to the rectangle tool. Yeah. You'll notice that there are these little circles on the corners of the rectangles that we draw. These are little corner widgets, and they allow me to curve the corner of any shapes. So you'll notice that as I drag one of those circles in, the rectangle's corners get curved. By default, all the corners will change together. But if I only want to affect one corner, then I just need to click on it once and it will get highlighted. And then I can just do that one corner on its own. That's the rectangle tool. Let's go back to the toolbar and let's click and hold on the rectangle tool. Once I click and hold and get this menu up, you'll notice that there's this little strip with an arrow to the right-hand side of the menu. If I click on that, all those shapes will fly out into another menu so that I don't have to keep on going back in there. So if you just bring out this menu, that work? Yeah. And we're just going to work our way across these tools. So the second tool along is the rounded rectangle tool. This allows me to draw rectangles with pre-rounded corners, which can be quite useful if you don't want to have to faff around with that on your own. But there's not a huge amount to say about that. So let's move on to the ellipse tool. So the third tool along, which allows me to draw ellipses. If I hold down Shift while drawing an ellipse, I'll be locked into a perfect circle. And this is a common theme throughout Illustrator. Holding down Shift will limit your sort of freedom to do stuff in order to help you be more precise. So Shift for perfect circles. Let's move on to the next tool. So it's the polygon tool. If I click on that, then I'll draw some kind of polygon. Holding down Shift will keep the polygon straight in terms of its orientation. I can change the type of polygon that I draw if while I'm drawing it, so while I've got my mouse button held down, I press the up and down keys on my keyboard, and that will allow me to change the number of sides that the polygon has down to a triangle. You can hold down up or down to increase the number quickly, but bear in mind that if you give it too many sides, then eventually it just starts to look like a circle.
Sorry, how are you doing that now? So you have to hold your mouse on the right hand. At the same time, you have to.
Oh, so it's once I've started drawing the shape, so I'm clicking and dragging to draw the shape, and then before I let go of the mouse button, if I've already drawn a shape and I want to change the number of sides it has, on the right hand side of its bounding box, the bounding box being the containing box that allows me to control it, you'll see that there's a little diamond on the right hand side, and as I hover the mouse over that, I get a little plus and minus, and if I drag that diamond up or down, I can change the number of sides, but only up to 11 sides. If I want to change the number of sides that a polygon has, then I need to drag this little diamond on the edge of its box. You'll also notice that these polygons have those little circles that allow you to curve corners as well. That's the polygon tool. Let's move on to the star tool, which allows you to draw stars. If I hold down Shift, again, the star will stay straight. If I press up and down on the keyboard while drawing a star, then I can increase the number of spikes that the star has. If I hold down the Control key while drawing a star, or Command on a Mac, I can increase the size of the spikes. If I hold down the Alt key or Option key on a Mac, then I'll make all of the sides of the star equal in length. And the last tool in the shapes list is the flare tool. So the flare tool allows you to draw a sort of lens flare effect, but it looks really bad. So I advise you not to use this. I'm not sure why it's here, but it does allow me to neatly move on to the fact that if you want to delete something on your artboard, then all you need to do is hit delete or backspace, and that will delete it. If we move back to the selection tool and we just explore what we can do with it, like I said before, with the selection tool, we can select things and move them around. I can select a group of things. If I click and drag to draw a box that encompasses them with the selection tool, and I can also delete multiple things at once as well. So I can draw a box around it with the selection tool and then press delete. I can also draw a box around things and move them as a group as well. And so I can do all sorts of things as a group.
From the star shape, so I increased all the number, which is visible. So now it's a different shape.
If I want to be more specific about what I select rather than just drawing a big box around things, I can shift click on objects. So if I want to select this circle here and then this star over here, I can just shift click on the star, select that. I can add more objects to the selection if I want to. So shift clicking on things allows me to select more of them. If I shift click on an object again, then I'll deselect it. So those are the basics of the shape tool and the selection tool.